Welcome, everyone, to another episode of In a Nutshell, the fortnightly podcast hosted by Natural Gas World, where we look at the global news and trends in the gas industry. My name is Joseph Murphy, and today we are looking at the Dutch upstream sector. The Netherlands was, for many decades, a key exporter of gas in Europe, thanks to the giant Groningen field. But some years ago, the government ordered the field's closure because of the tremors caused by production activities. With output at Groningen winding down and due to cease completely in 2022, we look at how the rest of the Dutch oil and gas industry is faring and what's next for the North Sea as a hub for energy production. With me today is Joe Peters, the General Secretary of the Netherlands Oil and Gas Exploration and Production Society. Joe, good to have you with us.
It's a pleasure being here, Joseph.
So, I mean, if we could start off just with a overview of how the sector is faring in this very unusual year. So how are Dutch gas and oil producers facing up to the market downturn? What have we seen in terms of investment levels, drilling rates? Have we seen much production getting shut down, at least earlier this year? And what does the outlook look like?
Yeah. Well, for the outlook, we do have a lot of plans, and the only thing I can say is that I indeed hope that we can all realize those plans, because the picture you described, Joseph, is correct. So Holland used to be an export country for oil and gas, and then when the earthquakes in Groningen started, that field was being shut down, and as you said, it will be shut down in 22. What is left then is the small fields, which have less production than our current consumption. So as from last year onwards, or the year before last, 2018, Holland is actually an importing country. I'll talk about the plans that we have later, but let me first describe the situation as it is right now. I've been in the oil and gas industry for almost 40 years. I used to work at Shell for almost 30 and now nearly 10 at Nogepa, the branch organization. And I must say that we are in a perfect storm. We find ourselves in a perfect storm, not only because of the consistently low oil and gas prices, we cannot do anything about it, but also because the investment climate in Holland has not been kept on the same level as for instance, the UK or Norway. We have been working on a investment deduction, that marginal fields incentive, and that is probably going to materialize this year, but it has taken 3 or 4 years to get that done, and in the meantime the other countries have not stood still. So low prices, an investment climate that is not on a par yet with other countries, and then on top of that, in Holland specifically, we added upon it a nitrogen problem. Because there was a verdict in Holland by the highest court that the system the country was using to compensate for nitrogen emissions, and that system entailed, by the way, that you could do your projects and your production and compensate later, that system was not allowed anymore. So you would have to compensate now right away with the project. And that has put the whole country, not just the oil and gas industry, but also the building industry, the construction industry, at a standstill. For instance, for our sector, it means nearly €1 billion of investment that are waiting on the shelf. Also, of course, because of the low prices, but also because we cannot get permits anymore, because it's very difficult to get to nitrogen levels that low that they don't harm nature areas in the Netherlands. And last but not least, 2 more things that I want to add to the perfect storm description, and then I paused for a minute. We are going to have a national CO2 tax, so a tax that comes on top of the ETS system. That is going to hurt us not straight away, but in several years when CO2 prices will be higher. They call that an intelligent tax, in a way that if you do investments to reduce your CO2 footprint, then it won't hurt you, because you will get subsidies to do the investments, and that is how you can earn the tax back. But we cannot do that because most of our small fields are nearly depleted, and if you need to compare them energy-wise with new fields that have electrical run platforms, thermodynamically, you can never win that game. So that tax will be hitting us. And then last but not least, the COVID that came upon us 3/4 of a year ago. So perfect storm with extremely low prices for a longer time, investment level that is not on the par with other countries, nitrogen, self-imposed nitrogen problem, and CO2 national tax that is added as a burden upon us, and then COVID. So I must admit that I've never seen it so bad in the 40 years that I'm in the industry, and that is why I'm worried that we cannot fulfill and materialize all the plans that we have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, certainly quite a few huge challenges. I wondered if we could backtrack a bit, and if you could, for the benefit of our listeners, walk us through a bit more about the Marginal Fields Incentive Program and what it will mean for these small fields.
Yeah, so the small fields, they were favored against the draconian fields, so they got an incentive to make sure that we would develop small fields, even if the draconian field was very, very big. And for that, years and years ago, the government defined an incentive, a 25 production uplift on your investment that you could deduct from your profits when you developed a marginal field. That's why it's called Marginal Fields Incentive. Under current circumstances, that is no longer sufficient to make it attractive, to seduce people to develop small fields. So we've been talking, and we started these talks 5-6 years ago with the previous minister about improving that incentive and lift it from 25 to 40. I know that the previous minister, he did not judge the political climate mature enough to do that, because we have a very anti-fossil parliament, or at least we had in those days. So that was not a game that he could win then in parliament. And this minister, he sent a letter to parliament in May 2018 announcing that he intended to lift the marginal fields incentive from 25 marginal to 40 generic. And well, May 2018. So that's 2.5 years ago already. And that's the time it has taken to get all the things done that the government needed to do, to talk it through with Brussels, to discuss it politically, to make sure that there is enough support in Parliament. And actually, this the law in which it is embedded now will be discussed in Parliament in a couple of weeks, the 15th, I say by heart, of December. So now it looks like it's eventually coming, but as I said, the UK and Norway have not stood still all these years.
And you said you're hopeful that it might come into force. Well, at least you expect it to come into force by the end of the year. That's quite a short amount of time we have left.
Yeah, it looks like there is sufficient support in Parliament, both within the coalition parties, but also in the remaining of Parliament. And the plan is that to implement it retroactively to Jan 1st of this year. Now, is that of a lot of use? It would have been, but now that people are not making any profits and not making money, well, deducting investments from your profit does not help a lot. So it actually came quite late. Let me put it like that. And I would have wished that the MFI would have been here 2 or 3 years ago. Then it would really have helped us to invest more.
And also moving to another point you raised about the very, very strict rules on nitrogen deposition. What is the government doing with this kind of impasse where you have permitting not only in your sector, but as you said, the construction sector at large, permitting being at something of a standstill?
Yeah, so officially they are working it and trying to reach agreement, but unofficially the fact of the matter is that they are not reaching agreement within the coalition. There's 2 parties that want to put it on hold and 2 others that would want to do something. And if you listen well in the corridors to people who are close to the government, they already make a statement that they are not going to solve that in this government period. And so we will have elections in March. And as it goes in Holland, after elections, you first have negotiations to get to a new coalition. That takes easily half a year. So in practice, I'm afraid it means that the nitrogen problem will not be resolved until after the summer of next year, which is a very bad sign, of course. And I wish I had better news, but I honestly don't. And do we still discuss with them? Yes, we do, on a weekly basis. Do we come up with proposals? So how can we compensate? We have even thought, as oil companies buying farms had to compensate for nitrogen emissions. All of that is very difficult to implement. So I'm really afraid that we have been asking for an exemption, I should say, for North Sea, for offshore, both for that CO2 tax that I mentioned and for the nitrogen issue, at least a temporary exemption, because as it stands now, it will be at a standstill until summer next year.
And because of this problem, and also the various other problems you mentioned, not least the impact of the pandemic on markets, I wondered if you could just tell me more about how the industry is faring right now in terms of numbers, instances of projects getting cancelled, with not too many projects moving forward. I mean, how are the suppliers, how are the contractors faring?
Yeah, well, not very well. So I can be very clear about that. And I will, if you look at most investments have been put on hold. The sector has been downsizing. All of the members of NOGEPA have been firing people. And you know what worries me most about that? I mean, these things have happened before in the past, but we have such a pivotal role to play in the energy transition in the Netherlands. What we have is infrastructure, both in terms of know-how and of hardware. And the future energy system, which will have to do with carbon capture and storage, with hydrogen, green hydrogen and blue hydrogen. We have the infrastructure that is already there. And once the small field will be empty, that will be the case, even if all the investments goes on, say in 20 years, 20 odd years, that is 200-300 billion cubic meters left. And the country is producing now from small fields between 10 and 20 something, even no less than 10 at the moment, because of all those standstill. Even then it will be over, and then that infrastructure can be used for can get a second life. And my worry is that the gap between a premature ending of the gas production and the beginning of things like big scale things like hydrogen and CCS, that gap will be too wide. And that basically we will be forced to clean it all up. And then others will be forced to build it all again 10 years later. And that is actually why I'm a little bit frustrated. And we do have nice plans. We do have a pivotal role in the energy transition. We have excellent plans for that. That role has been recognized as well. But as it stands today, all that is in serious jeopardy.
And in the short term, obviously the less gas that the Netherlands produces, until there's a structural change in its energy mix, it just means a lot importing more. And of course, importing more gas ironically means more emissions because of the distances and other factors. So you mentioned hydrogen, and I wondered if you could just walk me through some of the key projects that are underway in the Netherlands. So I know that there's some blue hydrogen and green hydrogen projects on the go.
Yeah, we have, well, first I would like to say something about production. Of course, production is going down now, slowly but steadily. Yeah? And it's not that if times are bad that production stops abruptly, but without sufficient investment, production is not kept at its max where it should be. Now, hydrogen, yes, we do have various projects. Members of NOGEPA are involved in both CCS project, but also green hydrogen, for instance, on platforms where we put well, relatively small scale hydrolyzers to just see how those things work in a salty environment like the North Sea. Because the ultimate picture for us is indeed that once we have a couple of more wind farms in the North Sea, we will have so much electricity that the grid onshore will not be able to handle it unless it is expanded dramatically, so tripled or something like that, not just a 10% extension or so. And we think that transportation of energy is better because it's way cheaper if you do it with green molecules. So we see then excess wind and or dedicated new wind farms that deliver too much wind for the grid to handle can be converted into hydrogen, and then so be the energy carrier of the new energy system. So it's not an energy source in itself, but it's a carrier that you can store, that you can use to make electricity, that you can heat with, you can use it for the industry, you can use it as base material. So that will be the core of the system. We have just started small-scale pilots with green hydrogen as we are talking now. Of course, if you would look back, I said I've been there now 9 years almost. 5 years ago, even as close as 5 years ago, I don't think people in Holland were very serious about hydrogen, give or take one or two who already saw the bigger picture. People were too much thinking in terms of singular systems. And one company was building windmills, the other was doing oil and gas, and yet another was doing biogas, what have you. And the thing about energy transition is that you should do it all together and look at the synergy of all those forms of energy, because you will need a system that is reliable, that is stable, that is clean, of course, and that is affordable. And any one of the single systems that I mentioned is not. So that is why you have to combine the whole. But not many people saw that. So hydrogen is quite new, but well, you have heard it as well. It's not just in the Netherlands. It's in Norway. It's in Germany. It's in Brussels, in the European Parliament. Plants with hydrogen are ramping up, and then we are trying to be part of those plants here in the Netherlands.
Mm-hmm. And does the association favour one type of hydrogen, blue, over green hydrogen, or do you see both having an important role to play? I mean, so the argument is that countries that have gas playing a big role in their energy mix and having an extensive gas grid, blue hydrogen can make more sense. What's your view?
Yeah, I fully agree. It's an excellent question, by the way. Thanks for asking it. I know that there are people who dogmatically are against blue hydrogen because its origin is fossil. And I think that is actually a little bit silly, because what counts is that you do away with the CO2 emissions. And for me, blue hydrogen is as green hydrogen. It's as simple as that. And if it is economically wiser or better available, more reliable, go for green. And I'm not even talking on my own behalf, because as I said, in Holland, in 10, 20 years, the gas production will cease to exist. We don't have much more, apart from Groningen, which is a story in itself that we are shutting down, of course. But it would not make sense to dogmatically say we only want green hydrogen. Another reason for that, by the way, is that if you would say so, and some green parties do, the first 10 years, you would not have a molecule of green hydrogen, because all the electricity can still be used as such. Green hydrogen, I see it, is only for later in the process when you have excess of electricity, and we are far from that at the moment.
Mm-hmm. And in light of that, what's your comment on the direction that the European Commission is moving in regarding hydrogen?
I like it, absolutely. I'm happy with, well, they set challenging targets, of course, and setting targets is something that politicians are good at. I've been a politician myself, so I can say that. Sometimes better at execution or realizing the targets, but you need stringent targets to progress, and that is what we're doing. And what I'm happy about is that they have indeed seen the pivotal role of hydrogen, that it is a system role, and that they have started to think systemically, not just in terms of we need more renewable energy. We want to get rid of gas or of all fossil. We want to be fossil fuel free. Those are, for me, all not so constructive statements. So I would want to look at the synergy of the whole. And that is how then you build the future energy system in the best possible way. And yes, it will still be expensive, but it will be optimal cost for what you get for that. And that is, by the way, that dogmatic being against some of the partial options is a poison for progress in the energy transition, because we are wasting our energy talking to each other about a couple of things that we may not agree about. Whilst 80 or 90% of everything we do agree, but that doesn't get sufficient focus.
Mm-hmm. And to develop blue hydrogen, a key part of that is also developing carbon capture and storage to decarbonize the molecule. You talked about how high, well, the Dutch government is implementing its own carbon tax system on top of the European one, and that is something which is putting a lot of pressure on producers. But on the other hand, to get to scale up carbon capture and storage, most would argue the best way to do that is to have high carbon taxes.
Correct.
Maybe you could talk about where the Netherlands, what is the Netherlands doing in terms of carbon capture and storage right now?
Yeah. Firstly, about the price mechanism, I do agree that to make it work, you need higher carbon prices, and we are not afraid of higher prices, but we want it all over Europe in the ETS system. And if people cannot get that system to work, if you then try to fix it locally, that doesn't work, I can tell you. Then you just shoot yourself in the foot. We do have several projects on the way where we will be doing trials with carbon capture and storage. It's not a new technology. It's been done in various places in the world already, and it will be an essential part of the energy transition, even if at this moment in time, maybe several people don't like it because they are afraid that it will be become a lock-in or an excuse for the industry not to transform. And so I share that concern, because that is not what we want. But having said that, it is also essential to start with carbon capture and storage now, because if we don't, we will be emitting even more CO2 into the atmosphere. So why wait until we have sufficient green hydrogen and do nothing for 10 years instead of starting now carbon capture and storage? And so sometimes when you discuss with NGOs this subject, then ultimately they do agree, but they say it should only be for a certain period of time, not indefinitely. And there again, I have a different view, because once you have developed a system of carbon capture and storage, that means so you have the capturing capability built into refineries and chemical plants, what have you. You have built a whole transportation system to bring it to small fields offshore. You have those small empty fields available. So why should I stop then in 10 years or in 20 years? Even if the whole of industry has been based on biomaterials, I will still continue, because I have this system and I will be creating negative emissions if I then still do carbon capture and storage. So also this is an issue where I find that some people are just have a too narrow view, and that, as I said, it is a poison to the progress of the energy transition. It's a pity.
Okay, very interesting discussion. Wondered if you had any closing remarks before we wrap it up.
Yeah, well, a discussion, it was more a monologue, because you asked me a couple of questions and asked for my view, and I have given that. I hope that people see that I'm trying to look at a broad spectrum of options, not just at my own industry, but because, as I said, in the Netherlands, we have nothing to gain anymore. We have, what we can gain is we add value by producing the remaining gas, and in 20 years that is over. So it's not, the reason is not that we want to be there still for 100 years producing gas, because we don't have that. But we also want to add value to the energy transition by our infrastructure and on know-how of the underground. And I hope that people see that as a picture that I've been trying to bring across. Thank you.
Thank you. This has been another episode of In a Nutshell, the fortnightly webinar hosted by Natural Gas, where we look at the global news and trends in the gas industry. Thank you, and see you next time. Thank you, Joe.
You're welcome. It was a pleasure.